So if this were technology based on new science held by some civilization that we don't know anything about, could be us from the future, could be somebody from neighboring galaxies, who knows what, it's hugely consequential scientifically.
Yeah.
And one of the things that causes me to, despite wanting to get on with you and understand each other better, also sort of push back relatively forcefully, is I don't want that window stigmatized anymore. It's like, it's enough.
Sure. Well, I think with the technology versus science question, I'm kind of in the why not both camp. New science is great, and new technology would indicate new science, but new technology is also an implementation of that understanding of those scientific principles, which in itself would be useful and interesting.
I should be clear about why I'm saying it this way. There's a general tilt away from science towards technology. And there are two hijacked conversations. One is that every time we end up talking about this, it goes to the technology discussion, because markets have been hot and science, in particular physics, has been kind of stagnant for a long time. And that means that people inadvertently start thinking about new technology from old science if we don't actually keep talking about science. The other thing is that Elon has more or less taken an imperative, which is that humans figure out whether we can stop sharing one planet and one atmosphere in order to diversify our risk, and turned it into a conversation about SpaceX and Mars. And in both cases, what we're doing is we're taking away from a very real conversation, which is we've got a potential, situation with a dictator who's invaded a neighboring country as if the 20th century had never happened in Europe, of all places, right next to Article 5 territory. This is extremely dangerous. And if human beings don't take the message from COVID and from Putin in Ukraine, that we better try to figure out whether we can spread out, because anything like an airborne respiratory virus or radiation can cover the planet very quickly, we're in trouble. So it's very important to me to prop the window open to, is it possible to leave this place? And the chief reason that we are unlikely to be able to leave this place, and thus we are likely to die in relatively short order due to our technological prowess and our lack of wisdom, is the Einsteinian limit on travel. Now, it's very hard to prop that window open because people have frozen Einstein in and Elon in. And those two individuals have changed this conversation. The Einsteinian contribution means we always talk about, is faster than light possible, which we shouldn't be talking about. We talk about wormholes. We talk about Alcubierre drives. We talk about time dilation and multigen. We talk about uploading into silicon. All of these things are useless, right? On the other front, Elon has focused us in the diversity conversation, to diversify from all on Earth to all on Earth plus Mars, as if we're going to terraform Mars before Elon turns 60. And both of these are very dangerous conversations when we have a very narrow hope of asking, should we be looking to figure out whether there's something beyond Einstein, which gives us possibilities beyond Einstein? So this is one of the reasons I'm most interested in the Overton window here, which is, if Einstein's restrictions persist to the ultimate theory, we're in a lot of trouble. It means we're probably not going anywhere, and our only hope is to stabilize this planet, which I don't see much hope in doing given how powerful we've become. And we have to get away from technology and from rockets and from Elon and from Einstein if we're going to actually turn this into a legitimate question, which is there anywhere we can actually go? Or, as is likely the case, we're stuck here. And
I think really, again, I'm a why not both camp there. It's, obviously we need to develop our technology, and yes, it would be great if we had more adventurous explorations of physics. But I don't really see how what I'm doing in any way narrows the Overton or expands the Overton
Oh,
window. I'm not sure which way I would go.
I want people who think they have UFO data to be welcomed scientifically and not stigmatized and made to feel as if they're aberrant freaks.
Works for me. If people have UFO data, I think, I personally am very happy to look at that data. I'm not just going to dismiss it out of hand. I'm going to analyze it. No, I guess the question you're raising there is, should other scientists be looking at this with some degree of seriousness? And yeah, there's an issue there. There is this stigma in science, but I think that stigma is largely well founded because of all the ridiculous stuff that comes along with UFOs. And I think if there was some good evidence, then people like the UAP task force would have actually brought it forward and actually done something with it.
Where are our top physicists?
I don't know. You're a top physicist. Well, you're a physicist. I don't know where you are in the world rankings, but
I'm actually a mathematician, but I don't know anybody in the top physics community who knows what the hell's going on here.
Yeah, well, nobody knows what's going on. So it's not like, they've been given the evidence and they've studied it and they've determined that there's nothing is going on. It's that the evidence isn't really very good.
Well, is the fact that our top people don't have the evidence indicative of something?
I don't know. I think, from my perspective, I think it's more likely that the evidence doesn't rise to the level where you would be able to justify bringing in outside people. Now, if it's something, like the Manhattan Project, where they brought in a whole bunch of scientists, then there's a lot of motivation there. There was a lot of reason to believe that the race for the atomic bomb was a very important matter of national survival. But with UFOs, the base level of evidence doesn't really seem to be there. We don't have this huge push that would be justified if there was actually this evidence of new technology or new physics out there, which would be worth trillions of dollars. Instead, we get these stupid little programs with $22 million.
Well, it doesn't make any sense. It seems like they might even not really be, they almost might be decoys for relatively small amounts of money. Are you familiar with the history that brought in the great topologist Solomon Lefschetz and Bryce DeWitt and Peter Higgs and Lewis Witten together, where there were two very weird efforts? One nakedly anti-gravity by a guy named Babson.
No, I'm not really familiar with that, but I've heard you talk about it before. The kind of this secret gravity research.
Yeah. So there was a very weird thing whereby in the 1950s there was, like, if you look at Feynman's popular books, he talks, there's a story called Any Questions, where he gets a black eye in a bar that was frequented by bookies and prostitutes.
Yeah, I read it.
What he's actually talking about is that he was going to Buffalo from Cornell to an aerospace company to deliver lectures. And there's this weird confluence between aerospace, what's known as the golden age of general relativity, and all of these top scientists that's never made a whit of sense, which almost certainly seems like there was some sort of program run through a couple of individuals named Babson and Bainson, which is extremely confusing, to bring a small cadre of leading scientists to discuss something that sounds like anti-gravity in the guise of discussing general relativity anew.
Right.
And I would dearly like to know what that program actually was.
Yeah.
And I would like more of us to be talking openly, because we know, for example, that Solomon Lefschetz was affiliated with this crazy Gravity Research Foundation.
Is there a bunch of classified documents about that people have been trying to get, or is there just nothing there? Because it seems to me like
David Kaiser at MIT, the physicist and historian, would probably be the best person to answer that. I've never gotten at this, nor have I put in the time or the energy. I've just noted that for some reason, suddenly in the 1950s, general relativity, which had been asleep since the late teens, wakes up as a field. There's a conference at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, which Feynman attends, which all of this seems to be spurred by two individuals, one of which creates what's called the Research Institute for Advanced Study, to make it sound like the Institute for Advanced Study. The other is something called the Institute for the Study of Physical Fields at UNC, North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And there's some weird thing between the Martin Aircraft Company, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, a bunch of these sorts of things. And I never even heard anyone talk about them to put it all together until I talked to Kaiser, and I said, am I losing my mind? He's like, no, this is this really weird history where just to put a weird period on it, the top mind in theoretical physics is the son of the leading anti-gravity researcher from the 1950s. It's a very bizarre state of affairs.
I guess you got to try to think what might have actually happened there. And from my perspective, it kind of, the most likely hypothesis, I'm just floating this out there, is that there was a research program into something that was quite extraordinary, but it didn't pan out. In the same way that Project Stargate was a research program into remote viewing. This is obviously a bit more hard science, but it was something they thought, oh, the Russians are going to be looking into this type of thing. We too should form a working group, maybe two working groups, and try to figure out if we can figure out what they figured out. And they look into it, but the same way that Stargate, nothing happens there. But it's classified, stays classified, and it's a mystery. I mean, no technology that we know of is anti-gravity. Nothing apparently came from it, unless there's this weird parallel track of science that is going on.
Anti-gravity may be a head fake, which means that it's really just post-space-time physics. It's now become very fashionable in theoretical physics to say that space-time is the problem and that it's doomed as a concept, and that what we're looking for is the successor to Einstein's sort of fabric for reality. It may be that anti-gravity is a really bad name for something to make it sound junky, but what we're really talking about, and particularly the presence of Lefschetz, is very interesting here. That what we may be discussing is a post-Riemannian or pseudo-Riemannian understanding of space-time, just a geometric replacement.
Yeah, and I heard you talk on Brian Keating's show about how you thought that might be kind of related to UFOs in a way, and that whatever the UFOs are kind of represents someone who has access to that higher level understanding that's above space-time. Yeah.
Or it could be that it's all nonsense and it's all disinformation. I mean, look, I'm very open-minded about this. I was in a discussion with Sam Harris not too long ago, and he said that one of the characteristics that he had noticed that differentiate us is that he tends to be very closed on the way in relative to my openness on the way in, but that he notes that I don't tend to slide all the way down the slippery slope to say, yeah, it's definitely aliens. And what I'm trying to do is really to keep that possibility open, that what we're talking about is we're talking about a science program, not a technology program, not a defense program, that has technological and military and security implications. See,
yeah, I'm all for keeping everything on the table, and this is part of my general philosophy of investigations.
I'm glad to hear that.
Is that I would keep, like, some kind of advanced technology, new physics, or aliens, or even things like say the simulation hypothesis. Perhaps these things are a glitch in the matrix. It's a possibility. It doesn't seem like there's any good evidence for it, but it's something that, why not consider that? Why not have all these things in the mix? Because if you're closing off various things, you might close off things by accident.
Okay, so look, there are minor branches of the decision tree that I find so remote as to say that I really don't want to spend time on it. But what I'm
You don't
asking,
spend time on it,
what?
but you keep it around.
Well, I guess what I'm asking is, do you see any banal branches of this decision tree that are still alive? I mean,
Yeah. Well, I
oh yeah,
mean, I think that there's a very big branch of the decision tree that does not involve, extraordinary flying craft. I think there's a large possibility. There's a large possibility that all the UFO encounters have essentially, simple explanations. And in those simple explanations, I would include things like experimental aircraft by the US government and perhaps occasionally experimental aircraft by other governments. But the vast majority are going to be things like airborne clutter, people misidentifying things, people having hallucinations from stress, like fighter pilots who have been in the air for a real long time, things like that. And I think that is definitely the avenue of this decision tree of what things might be that I go down. And I think it's likely to be a decision tree that has very many leaves. That's probably not the right way of putting it, because it's still like you end up at one leaf, but you don't. There's all these different things. You're going to end up at a branch that has lots of leaves. And all of these things are contributing to what we actually see. People see things that are optical illusions, like this triangle thing, like a DC-8 looks exactly like a triangle because it has a light on each wingtip and a red one in the middle, and it looks like a triangle with 3 lights on the corners and a red thing in the middle. So that probably accounts for a bunch of those. There's lots and lots of different things. And then there's also this other layer of it, which is this government, the pressure from the invisible college, these people who are really into it, and the government, people in government who are either somewhat corrupt, they're getting kickbacks or whatever, and the people pay them to do things, or they just have interest themselves. There's all these complicated layers of things going on that doesn't really involve some vast new hidden parallel track of science or a defense department like science program or aliens or time travelers or anything like that. So I would keep those things as possibilities, but it seems like to me everything is probably going to be in this big old branch over here.
If you enjoyed this TOE clipping, then the full video is linked in the description. You should also sign up for TOE Mail, which is again in the description and the pinned comment. You'll receive immediate access to all exclusive updates from the Theories of Everything podcast. It also helps me communicate directly with the core TOE community. You'll also receive my top 10 TOEs. Think of it as the intellectual version of Quentin Tarantino's Obsession.